All right, so I think we can gather that what Jeff Durbin here says about Daniel chapter 2 is that the stone cut without human hands is representative of the first advent of Christ. Okay, the stone in Daniel chapter 2, according to Jeff, I think this is what I gather is Jeff's viewpoint, is that the stone of Daniel chapter 2 represents the first advent of Christ. I'm going to say that's absolutely false. That's untrue. That is not true. The stone that smites the metal man image at its feet and toes of iron mixed with clay is not representative of the first advent, but representative of the second advent. That is a picture of the second advent of Christ in Daniel chapter 2. But we need to know what the metal man image is of Daniel chapter 2. I do have it, yeah. This is the dream of the king, King Nebuchadnezzar. And this is Daniel telling the king what his dream was, and then he's going to give the interpretation of it. And you can read, again, this is all the way down in verse 31 we're starting. So read the whole chapter because it's fantastic. How Yahweh is the one true God over against all the false gods of the enchanters and astrologers and tarot card readers and occultists in Babylon. And so this is what Daniel tells the king. You, O king Nebuchadnezzar, and you saw, that is, a great image. This guy is totally licking my ear. You are too handsome for words. You know that? You are. You're a handsome boy. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold. So it has a head, its chest and arms of silver. So this is a man. This is like a symbol of a person, a humanoid. It's got a head, it's got chest and arms. Chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand and struck the image on its feet of iron and clay. Notice, not on the legs of iron, but on the feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. The iron, the clay, then the bronze, the silver, gold, all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, that is like dust in the wind, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image, where? On its feet and toes of iron mixed with clay, became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, so pay special attention to these. The head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, 2 legs of iron, and feet and toes partially of iron and partially of clay, and then the stone, and it smites this metal man image at its feet and toes of iron and clay, not at the legs of iron. Okay, but listen to what Jeff Durbin has to say about Daniel chapter 2, because he's going to talk about 4 empires. Well, let's just listen here quick.
But I wanted to show you this in terms of how the story ties together with Jesus. I think it's amazing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I want you to. So go to Daniel 2.
I definitely want us to spend a lot of time here,
so you can see it with your own eyes. Daniel chapter 2
okay,
is the section of scripture where you have this dream. You know about the dream?
yeah,
The interpretation of the dream. I just want to point you to the text,
okay,
so that you see it.
Daniel 2.
In Daniel chapter 2, Daniel interprets the dream of the king. He sees, of course, this amazing structure and statue, and he sees a stone coming and destroying these kingdoms. But here's the point. As Daniel gives this interpretation of the dream,
right,
he gives this in verse 44, chapter 2, verse 44.
44.
And in the days of those kings,
wait a minute,
the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and interpretation is sure. Here's what happens in the dream. Again, just to touch on it, 4 kingdoms are promised. 4 kingdoms. And it says during the time of the 4th kingdom, God himself is going to establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It'll be like a...
Whoa, 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 whoa. 4 kingdoms. Wait a minute. 4 kingdoms. Okay, wait. Okay, here's the you are this head of gold. Okay, that's Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom or empire of Babylon, or the Neo-Babylonian Empire, as some historians call it. That's the Babylonian Empire. That's the head of gold. Another kingdom, that's 2, inferior to you shall arise, yet, and that's the silver, the chest and arms of silver, and that is the Medo-Persian Empire. And yet a third, oh, there's go third, 3, kingdom of bronze, that's the Grecian Empire. Okay, third, that's the Grecian Empire, which shall rule over the earth. Okay, the middle and belly of, and thighs of bronze. And there shall be a 4th kingdom, strong as iron. So that's the 4th kingdom, strong as iron, because breaks into pieces and shatters all things. Like iron, it crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And he saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the... So we're talking about the feet and toes of iron and clay. So again, really, it's not 5, here's 4 kingdoms here, but then after this kingdom, the 4th kingdom, the legs of iron, the Roman Empire falls, then you got this, the feet and toes, partially of iron and partially of clay. And then Daniel chapter 7 talks about the 10 horns, and then this little horn that arises at this time. But the legs of iron represents the Roman Empire. That came to an end in 476 AD. Okay? 476 AD. The time of Christ and the apostles was the 1st century AD. The Roman Empire went on for another 400 some odd years after the time of Christ and the apostles. Okay? 400 some odd years after the Roman Empire went on, after the time of Christ and the apostles. Okay? So the legs of iron didn't turn into the feet and toes, partially iron, partially clay, until after 476 AD. Okay? That's when it was a divided empire. And only then does the stone, which destroys all these, becomes a great mountain which fills the whole earth, does that stone smite the metal man on its feet and toes of iron and clay. The first advent came at about the kneecaps of the legs of iron. You see how that works? Therefore, this stone cannot represent the first advent. It must represent the second advent, not the first advent. The first advent came long before these 2 legs of iron turned into the feet and toes of iron and clay. You see what I'm saying? But Jeff says, well, the first advent came during the Roman Empire. He's absolutely correct. The first advent, like iron, the iron monarchy of Rome. And as you saw, the feet and toes of partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. Notice. And as the toes and feet were partly, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and part. This is after the fall of the Roman Empire. After the 2 legs go into the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. And again, this is what happens when you don't take Daniel chapter 7 into consideration either, because it is at this time, the feet and toes, partly of iron and clay, is when the Antichrist arises and continues on for 1260 literal years. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed or left to another people. Okay? This is a picture of the second advent, not the first. Okay? So I guess impossible to see that if your presupposition is one of preteristic post-millennialism, I guess. Okay, Jeff is a high partial preterist and a post-millennialist. Again, the confusion, the leading to errors and falsehoods concerning God's prophetic word.
stone cut out of a mountain that eventually fills the entire earth. It starts small, a stone, that becomes a ginormous mountain that fills the entire earth. Now, this is key.
Well, it's okay. It starts small and becomes a great kingdom, but notice again, and he only went down to verse 44. But here's the dream itself in verse 31. Okay, so you got the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, middle and thighs of bronze, and then the two legs of iron. That's the Roman Empire right there, the two legs of iron. That lasts until 476 AD. And then its feet, partly of iron and partly of clay. Okay? And where does this image get? It strikes the image on its feet of iron and clay. Okay? It doesn't strike it on its legs of iron. The legs of iron, representative again of the Roman Empire. Okay? Here's the interpretation of the dream. And I just have the text there, but we'll go to what is represented. Head of gold, Neo-Babylonian Empire, 605 to 539 BC. Chest and arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, 539 to 331 BC. Belly and thighs of bronze, Grecian at 331 to 168. Legs of iron, Roman Empire, 168 to 476 AD. Again, then the feet and toes after this time, 476 AD. The 476 AD all the way until our present day, until the stone strikes it. Okay? Some Christians are under the misconception that the stone cut out by no human hands represents the first advent of Christ in this prophecy. Most Preterists assert this. Amillennialists I've seen assert this about Daniel chapter 2. But Jesus' first advent came at the height of the Roman power, symbolized by the two legs of iron in the 1st century AD. The Roman Empire, however, continued on in power for about 446 years after the first advent of Christ. That is, and I take that about to 30 AD is when Christ was crucified. So Jesus came at about the kneecaps of the fourth kingdom mentioned, the legs of iron the legs of iron. And only after this time would the stone smite the image. And only after the time of the rise of the little horn. Only after the time the little horn would exercise power for 1260 years and then receive a deadly wound at the end of that time, which was in the latter part of the 18th century. And only after the time that the earth beast would rise as a world-dominating empire and eventually enforce the mark of the Antichrist. And that earth beast, of course, Revelation 13:11 through 17, is the United States as the world's dominating empire. Okay? So the stone represents the second advent of Christ. His second coming, not his first. Okay, so I think Jeff is trying to and he said, go read this on your own. I don't have time to go through it here. Well, take the time to go through it. Think about the presuppositions that you're bringing to the text. The Preterists / postmillennialists. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work prophetically with Daniel chapter 2 or with Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, we see the same prophecy, but this time they're symbolized by 4 beasts rising up out of the sea. Lion with eagle's wings now instead of the head of gold. Same thing. Babylonian Empire. Bear raised on one side. The chest and arms of silver, Daniel chapter 2, Medo-Persian Empire. But more information is given. It's not just the chest and arms of silver. It's a bear raised up on one side, indicating that I think the Medes were more powerful than the Persians. And then, they came together and became the Persian Empire. But the Bible actually calls it the Medes and the Persians. So I call it the Medo-Persian Empire in Daniel chapter 8. 3 ribs in its mouth or teeth, likely symbolizing the 3 major conquests of the Medo-Persian Empire, namely Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Okay, and then we have the leopard with bird's wings, the middle belly and thighs of bronze, symbolizing the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great. And the Grecian Empire went up all the way until Rome would ascend to world dominating status. And in fact, Cleopatra the seventh, I think technically she was Cleopatra the seventh, the Cleopatra that we think of, and Mark Antony were in Egypt, obviously, but she was Greek. She was Grecian. She was like the last remnants of the Grecian Empire. Okay, one of the last. Um, and so much so was Alexander's conquest during this time important is that the Hellenization of the areas that he conquered, that is the bringing of Greek culture and Greek language and Greek thinking and thought and philosophy and political thought, etc., and libraries. I mean, there is a reason that the New Testament, written during the time of the Roman Empire, there's a reason that the New Testament was not written in Latin. It was written in Koine Greek, what's called Koine or Common Greek, because Greek was still the common language even throughout the Roman Empire when it was dominant. Okay, so the Roman Empire, 168 BC to 476 AD. Okay, then also symbolized by the two legs of iron, not the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay, just the two legs of iron. That's the Roman Empire. And then the 10 horns, symbolizing the 10 tribal kingdoms that made up the once ancient Roman Empire after its fall. That's a good list. I quote Dr. John Gill, gives another list. And Gill even quotes Mead and Sir Isaac Newton, Bishop Lloyd, and says, look, we're all pretty much in agreement here with our lists of the 10 tribal nations that made up the former Roman Empire, out of which the little horn would eventually rise to power and continue for 1260 years. 1260 years. 3 of the 10 horns would be plucked up by the roots before the little horn could rise to power. All right, I go through a little bit of that, but again, as far as Daniel chapter 2 and the stone, I think Jeff says it symbolizes the first advent. I'm pretty sure that's his story, and that's what he's saying about it. This is false. This is false. It's representative of the second advent, not the first advent. So let me know what you think about that down below. Daniel chapter 2, the template of all Bible prophecy, still is to this day. It was when it was first given. It still is to this day. It goes, Daniel chapter 2's prophecy goes all the way from the time of the Babylonian Empire till the stone becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth. So all the way up to the second advent and beyond. Daniel chapter 2. This one prophecy right here. It encompasses everything that would happen from Daniel's day all the way up until the second advent and beyond that, when the New Jerusalem, when the new earth is regenerated, the old earth being destroyed by fire, this one that we live on now, everything we see around us, all the buildings, skyscrapers, cities, towns, all that, destroyed, going to be completely destroyed by fire. Completely destroyed by fire and completely regenerated then for God and his people to fill the whole earth. And the New Jerusalem will be right in the center of it. That'll be like our capital, this big, huge heavenly city that comes down from heaven and touches down onto the earth in Revelation chapter 21. Check that out. We're even given the dimensions of it. Figure out the dimensions of the New Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, because he gives us the dimensions. That's a pretty cool study, actually. It's a big mountain, big city. So, yeah, comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. We'll talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.